Great. So I think I see a lot of you have joined already. So yeah, now officially a very warm welcome to this online event, to the webinar on mitigation heavyweights effective NDCs for the building sector. Yeah, this is a webinar hosted by the NDC Partnership. It's organized together with the SPA program of GIZ in the Program for Energy Efficiency in Buildings. And we're really happy to bring together today experts from the building sector, from the energy sector, and from the climate sector. And yeah, I think I see your names. I think you're joining from all over the world, and we're really looking forward to a very good discussion. My name is Anna Zinnecker. I work for the Program for Energy Efficiency in Buildings. And yeah, I'll be a moderator for this session. And just, yeah, as a really quick intro to the topic, we will be speaking about a real mitigation heavyweight today. We will speak about buildings. They make up 38% of emissions related to energy. So this is really a heavyweight, more than transport or industry. And yeah, it's a very dynamic situation with the building surface set to double by 2060. Of course, not only mitigation, I think adaptation, we all know, we spend most of our time in buildings, so this is also a really big topic. Yeah, so a really quick introduction what we're gonna do today. We have a few questions that we set ourselves. So, I mean, first of all, of course, why buildings? I think why should we speak about buildings and the NDCs? We'll definitely, I think, speak a little bit about money. No, this question of channeling investments towards green buildings and what governments can do here. And then, of course, the big question and also our headline is what are good and effective NDCs for the building sectors, and yeah, how they can be translated into actions. Yeah, and just like really quickly, what expects you today? So we'll have a welcome from NDC Partnership and GIZ, and then we'll dive right in. We'll look into what the situation is, what the NDC Partnership observes with this topic. Then we will have a look at what the link is between buildings and climate. So just like the latest trends and figures. Yeah, and then we'll really roll up our sleeves and we look into kind of implementation and practice. We'll hear about you know, what are effective NDCs, how could they be implemented, and we'll hear from Vietnam about their experiences as kind of a pioneer in this field. So yeah, I think without much further ado, I think I'll hand over to Romeo Bertolini from the NDC Partnership for the official welcome. Romeo, the floor is yours.
Thanks so much, Anna, and thank you for joining us here in this event. I'm very happy to be here. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I think this is a great opportunity to get together once again and go beyond what we once called the climate silo and discuss concrete activities, concrete sectors that contribute to climate change, and that on the other hand could of course also help to reduce greenhouse gases in order to fight and oppose the challenge of climate change that we are seeing. My name is Romeo Bertolini. I'm the Deputy Director of the NDC Partnership Support Unit and also heading the Office of the Support Unit here in Bonn at the UNFCCC headquarters. I'm happy to present this event, and thanks again for having us here and for sharing our experience with you with the GIZ SPA program, the PEEB program, and the Global Alliance for Building and Construction. What we all know that we work very closely together, especially with our GIZ colleagues, and it's very good to see how we spread the word and how we go across activities and across sectors and mainstream really the issue of NDC implementation and climate action. In 2015, we all know we had the Paris Agreement and the SDG agenda. So that was the starting point also when we thought back then, and also with the guidance, by the way, of Vietnam and many developing countries, that global collaboration was needed to achieve the ambitious goal of the Paris Agreement. And this eventually led to the launch of the NDC Partnership at COP22 in Marrakesh, led by WRI, UNFCCC, Germany, and as well guided, as I said, by many developing countries. At that time, the Paris Agreement and NDCs were really seen as an implementing instrument, but largely known only by the climate community. So breaking this up and making it a whole of society approach was actually the objective, and we wanted to follow a country-driven member-led approach. The partnership advanced the goals of the Paris Agreement by bringing together countries and institutions in new ways to accelerate the NDC implementation, going beyond the environmental ministries, include the heavy weights also in cabinet, like finance ministries, energy ministries. 5 years from after that, we are now a global coalition of 193 members, including almost 115 countries and institutions, and a lot has changed, I think, since we started working as this umbrella matchmaker and facilitator. We are seeing the mainstreaming of global efforts to mitigate and reduce risk becoming really a whole of government, whole of society approach, and climate change is no longer a standalone issue dealt with in the chambers of the COP negotiations. And the relevance of the side events and the exhibition there, the COP becoming an exchange platform for ideas and action, I think has been proven to be very successful. Unfortunately, of course, COVID and has been really reduce this engagement last year, and we really went down with our activities to meet in person. But this seminar here also demonstrates that I think we go beyond, and we try to, with a professional management and infrastructure, thanks Krista, colleagues, to set this all up. We also try to mitigate the loss of these opportunities, but by all means, we should go back and have these kind of activities and interaction very soon. The reason why I think it's very important to have these discussions is that heavyweight sectors, which are a lot less visible than coal, power, deforestation, or the airline business, is super important, and this is very important to also yield quick wins in reaching the goals of the Paris Agreement, and consider them as part and parcel of NDC and climate action. The partnership is now active in 78 countries. We will hear much more about it in the next hour or so. We work in 64 countries, and there is a lot of work also being doing in increasing the ambition of the NDCs through the Climate Action Enhancement Package. The focus, of course, of the partnership as this umbrella coalition basically lies in bringing in more transparency and building on already existing structures through ministries that haven't yet been involved in the climate conversation to the extent that would be wise and logic. So by tapping into these heavyweight sectors, including the construction sectors, we're triggering nothing new, but we will be focusing on gaps that already exist in the countries and make sure that there's visibility, and the activities and the potential is heard and also taken up. We've been active with other platforms, such as the Coalition of Finance Ministries for Climate Action and the Partnership's own Economic Advisory Initiative on Green Recovery, that really sees that there is an appetite and a sensitivity from the Ministers of Finance, for instance, energy, transport, agriculture as well, in challenging investment into heavyweight sectors, as they also have this great potential to be contributing to the Paris Agreement and the commitments countries make in this international agreement. So in this regard, the building sector presents us with some quick wins. Our data tells us that there's much more interest for support related to the building sector, and that nearly 1/3 of the requests goes unanswered. So there's a lot of funding and a lot of activity out there, but the building sector as such is a little bit of an orphan when it comes to the requests we see, and especially the provision of responses and the provision of support that we then are able to generate. 136 countries, just a couple of figures, mention buildings and the construction sector in their first NDC, but they often remain vague in the implementation actions. More is expected, of course, in the coming new round of the NDCs, which we are just seeing coming in to the Secretariat and being analyzed. Global surveys also show that in 2019, buildings represented 38% of the total global energy use, and the total global energy-related CO2 emissions stands at 39%, the highest level ever measured. So we need to move quickly with all hands on deck approach and rely on models that work, and we are operating at a very opportune moment for doing so. So I wish you all a constructive exchange, and I think that is a very good start to go a little bit deeper and see also how the international community and Germany and other actors are addressing the needs of this heavyweight sector that we've been identifying as one of the bigger, of course, emitters, and being responsible for GHG emissions at the same time, but also having the potential to really change big time when it comes to be more sensible and more future oriented. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Romeo. Yeah, this was really good for kind of like pointing to the importance of this discussion today. And I think without further ado, I will hand over to Bernd Markus Liss, who will give us an introduction and really set us up for this discussion. And just really briefly, I mean, yeah, Bernd is the sector lead of GIZ for climate change and climate policy. And yeah, I think very many people on this call probably know him. He has extensive working experience, both in implementation, supporting countries across the globe, but also with climate policy. So Bernd, yeah, we're looking forward to you setting us up for this discussion. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Anna. Thank you, and a warm welcome to everybody. I'm especially glad to be in a call with Vietnam, as one of my very important stations in my career was working in Vietnam from the early 90s to up to 2010. And therefore, I'm especially glad also to have you colleagues from Vietnam here in the call, and specifically looking into the building sector in Vietnam. I thank you also for the opportunity to provide an input on behalf of GIZ. As a federal enterprise, as you may know, we work in support to sustainable development worldwide, including, of course, climate goals. Since 2017, as an implementing partner of the NDC Partnership, GIZ is engaged in more than 40 NDC partner member countries, in support to both establishing and implementing country engagement processes, as well as in accompanying governments directly in their climate change agendas. In our engagement, we are acting on behalf of the German Federal Ministries for the Environment, Nature Conservation and Nuclear Safety, known as BMU, and the Ministry for Economic Cooperation and Development, BMZ. We are very happy to contribute to this online seminar because we believe that the long engagement history with the government of Vietnam is particularly interesting to show the coherence of efforts between the NDC Partnership and GIZ in order to strengthen climate action, nationally but also internationally. GIZ has been working in Vietnam for more than 20 years in many different sectors, currently with a focus on environment, energy, and vocational training. The project Support to Vietnam for the implementation of the Paris Agreement, funded by the German Environmental Ministry under the International Climate Initiative, supports Vietnam in establishing an institutional framework for implementing the Paris Agreement across all sectors. This effort builds on Vietnam's National Plan for Implementation of the Paris Agreement, which also serves since 2018 to Vietnam's partnership plan, as Vietnam's partnership plan. This is a successful example of how the NDC Partnership country engagement process has been adapted according to country needs. Another project, the Franco-German Program for Energy Efficiency in Buildings, in short PEEB, funded by the environmental ministries of France and Germany jointly, as well as the French Agency for Development, cooperates with Vietnam since 3 years. The government of Vietnam submitted already in September 2020 its updated NDC to the UNFCCC Secretariat. In this way, Vietnam was amongst the first 20 countries to submit an updated NDC. It includes energy saving in the industrial sector and in buildings as a crucial element for reaching its unconditional target. To ensure those ambitious goals can really be met, PEEB is supporting the Ministry of Environment and Natural Resources and the Ministry of Construction towards the development of an NDC roadmap for buildings and construction with a vision to 2050. This roadmap will help the diverse key stakeholders of the building sector to create a common vision and set clear climate targets towards 2050. Furthermore, the establishment of an NDC buildings coordination platform is being discussed. Our honorable guest, Mr. Ha Quang Hum, Deputy Director General of Housing and Real Estate Marketing Management Bureau in the Ministry of Construction, will give us insights later on into the Vietnamese approach to integrating energy efficiency in buildings into their NDC roadmap. The building sector, as it has been said, is a sleeping giant for climate mitigation and adaptation. Buildings accounted for the largest share of energy-related CO2 emissions, 38% in 2019. This number is specifically important because with rising incomes, urbanization, and population growth, the built surface is set to double by 2060. Most new buildings are highly inefficient when it comes to energy consumption. Given the current average lifetime of a building of 30 up to 80 years, there is enormous risk of high carbon lock-in. However, policy, tax, or other financial incentives can trigger investments in energy-efficient construction and renovation and contribute as such to the resilience of buildings. 53 countries currently mention energy-efficient buildings in their NDCs, and 38 specifically call out building energy codes indicating the importance of energy efficiency in buildings for the future global climate. While the countries that refer to building energy efficiency in their NDCs represent 63% of global building energy consumption, there's an urgent need for clear targets for the building sector, proactive coordination, and robust policies and strong implementation to reduce emissions. This online seminar has therefore the objective to highlight the importance of such untapped opportunities for the global 1.5-degree goal under the Paris Agreement, and to show best practice examples and tools to unlock the mitigation potential of these mitigation heavyweights. I'm looking very much forward to learn more from the experience from Vietnam and also from the colleagues from the Global ABC and Global Building Performance Network who are supporting global actions towards a zero-emission, efficient and resilient buildings and construction sector. I wish you very good interaction, and I'm looking forward to very interesting inputs and insights. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Bernd. I think that really set us up. And I think without further ado, I think we'll dive right in. Our first input is we will shine a light on countries' needs and requests on buildings. And we'll hear from the NDC Partnership. So a warm welcome to two colleagues, Thibaut Voiter and Ploy Palin Sundar Rajampaka, based in the Bonn office of the NDC Partnership. So we have Thibaut as the head of knowledge products with over 15 years of experience in research, implementation, multi-stakeholder partnerships, and I think across all continents. And also Ploy. Ploy Palin is a country engagement specialist. She also has a large portfolio of countries that she supports. They include Albania and Armenia, and also in the Asian region. So yeah, to you both, the big question, what is happening in the NDC Partnership? What do you see?
Thank you, Anna, and good morning, good afternoon, or even good evening for colleagues, especially in Vietnam and in other parts of Asia. It's a real pleasure for me to have the chance to talk about energy efficiency with such a distinguished panel and such an important audience. And I will first give you an overview of indeed our activities within the NDC partnership on when they relate to buildings. Highlighting what are our needs, what are the needs of our countries right now in terms of buildings, the needs that haven't been addressed yet. And then Ploy will take a deep dive into the examples of Albania and Armenia and what they are doing in terms of building efficiency. So next slide, please. Romeo already told you about the NDC partnership, so I will be very quick. I think one strong idea here is simply that we are very much country-led, and that this data that I'm going to present you now are very much based on all the requests that we've received from countries. So they really reflect the work and the demands from the countries in terms of building efficiency and the building sector more generally. Next slide, please. So let's start with a few key trends that we've been observing in the building sector and on building efficiency. First of all, we can see that many of the building requests in our countries, in our over 75 countries, were already there during the first round of NDC. And just to clarify here, we're really talking about mostly developing countries, not so much about emerging economies. But what we're seeing here is that on the left pie, you can see the implementation requests that we've received. So buildings is far from being the most important one, but still there's a significant number of requests in that field. And the share of these requests are not so important when we look at NDC enhancement requests. This means that in all countries, again, building was already there during the first round of NDC, and it's not such a major theme in terms of enhancement. Next slide, please. So another important point that we would like to highlight is the fact that we are observing some very diverse requests coming from the building sector. They're diverse, first of all, by their geographic origins. And we have many countries from many different places of the world and many different levels of development that are requesting support from for the building sector. And there is this belief that is maybe changing now, but that energy efficiency is mostly a thing from rich countries, especially when it comes to building. And the data, what we're seeing within the partnership, proves that this is wrong, and that we have a number of developing countries that are also asking for support in the field of building. As you can see here, when you break down the developing countries into different sections, the lower middle income countries are the ones with the most building efficiency requests. Another belief that is challenged by our request is that the building area is mostly oriented towards mitigation actions. So though we have almost 60% of these, adaptation is also important, and probably that we can expect it to grow due to the extreme weather, all the high temperature phenomenon that are happening across the globe. Adaptation is also a major topic in our request. Next slide, please. So what types of projects are our countries asking us to work on? As you can see, it's really boils down basically to finance. It's about financing projects mostly, and there is needs for more finance, for more money invested in building efficiency, and more generally, I think we can say about on energy efficiency. And then we have also a need for more policy, for more support in terms of policy, laws, and studies and capacity building. Another important feature also, I think, that we can see from our work with countries is that within the partnership, we have this process where we receive requests from the countries, and then we work closely with them and our partners in order to identify an action plan, an implementation plan that will lead to the policies for the implementation of the NDC. And from these requests to the implementation plans, the buildings items are multiplied by 7, which shows that building efficiency is a field that really requires international support in order to be in order to address its mitigation potential. And we are really working towards that with our partners such as GIZ, which leads me to the next slide, please. So as I said, we are working with our partners to address this important topic. The most involved actors within the partnership, again, on the building field are GIZ, GGGI, the AFDB, UNDP, and KfW, with many other organizations that are working actively on the promotion of building efficiency. But these ones listed here are really the ones involved in most of the projects. However, we still have a third, as Romeo was mentioning, a third of the building sector requests that remain unaddressed within the partnership. You have a list of the countries here that are still requiring for further support. I'm not going to read this list through, but if you, as a participant, are seeing some countries where you are working or where you can see some potential for projects in the building efficiency area in these countries, please reach out to us and we'll be happy to see how we can work together on these topics. So that was my quick overview. I will now hand over the floor to Ploy, who will tell you about some projects that we're conducting. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Thibault. Thank you very much, and good morning and good evening, everyone. Next slide, please. What I'd like to share briefly is more specific requests that we have seen through our country engagement process. And I'd like to share on Albania and Armenia. For Albania, Albania joined the partnership in 2019, and the requests that we see in the building sector is developed by the Ministry of Tourism and Ministry of Environment and Tourism, which is our focal point, in collaboration with the Ministry of Infrastructure and Energy. We see two main requests in terms of building efficiency from Albania. The first one is energy efficiencies in the public buildings and public facilities, with the key output here being developing a national building code that incorporates energy efficiency. The specific activities that could be involved here would be developing the long-term strategy for investments on public buildings on energy efficiency, and also the preparation of the national building code. The other interesting request is on establishing financial mechanisms for energy efficiency in buildings. So this relates to Thibault's point as well, in that we see countries requesting support in terms of financial finances and also financial mechanism development. And specific activities here would be in developing financial instruments to achieve higher renovation rates of both private and public buildings through attracting private finance. For Albania, we also see requests for energy efficiency in the industry sector, with a specific request for pilot projects for energy efficiency for small, medium enterprises, and conducting energy audits, which are very helpful for us in identifying where is a good starting point and how we can optimize an energy system. So this is for Albania. Next slide, please. And in Armenia, the examples that I'd like to share is from priority action items that were raised in the partnership plan. The partnership plan is a key plan that we use in our country engagement process, which outlines activities, outputs, and key performance indicators to coordinate the work of the partners and also the support in our countries. It allows countries to also highlight their needs and identify further support gaps and mobilize technical and financial support. In specifically regarding the building sector and energy efficiency for Albania, it's categorized in two main outcomes. First is on the legislation and strengthening the management of residential buildings. And the second one is more relating to social behavior changes, to more environmentally minded consumption. These key KPIs that we see in the partnership plans include incentives and subsidies to credit loans for energy efficient housing, support of specific municipalities in implementing rehabilitation programs that involve energy efficiency and integrating renewable energy measures into public buildings, and also a social justice and element is also seen in providing support for social housing that is environmentally sound. To wrap it all up, what we see is that the request for support that we see from countries relates to policies and laws. It relates to to getting further support in studies and capacity building, and also in finance. So this gives us a brief overview of what we are seeing. And if you have any further questions, Thibaut and I are more than happy to provide further inputs here as well. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Ploy and Thibaut. That was really great to see the request for support coming out. So I think that will also be a good basis for discussion later. Just for everyone also, please, for all our presenters, please be mindful of the time. Yeah, so I will not speak more, but I will hand over to Nora Steurer. Nora from the Secretariat of the Global Alliance for Buildings and Construction. Yeah, I think I'll just suffice to say, I would say she's the driving force behind this process that brings together stakeholders from across governments, private sector, civil society, research, and intergovernmental organizations. They've just published the last global status report on buildings. Yeah, and we're very happy that Nora will tell us more about why buildings are so important for the climate. Nora.
Thank you, Anna. Thanks for having me. I'm a little bit under the weather, excuse my voice, but it'll be great nevertheless. And everybody who spoke before me set the scene so excellently. I'm very, very pleased to connect to that where I can. Next slide, please. Thank you. So I would like to give you a little bit of an overview over emissions, trends, and benefits of low carbon and resilient buildings. As Anna said, I'm Nora Steurer and I work with the Global Alliance for Buildings and Construction. We work closely with PEEB, with the program for energy efficiency in buildings. It is, as we sometimes call, the child of the global ABC. And it's a very good child, if I may say so. Please, next slide. So why buildings? Just to remind us again, I mean, I'm based in Paris, and the equivalent of Paris is actually added in floor space every 5 days. Paris is a lovely city, but it gives us an overview of the magnitude of the problem, but also the opportunity that we have here, because half of the buildings standing in 2060 have not even been built yet. So we need to get it right now. And I think Thibaut let us know really, really well that we do really have a sleeping giant at our hands. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Thank you. The previous one was good. It just went a little bit fast. Thank you. Before I go further into the data, a few words about the Global ABC for those of you who don't know us yet. As Anna said, we are the leading platform for stakeholders from government, from private sector, civil society, and research to work together towards a zero emission, efficient, and resilient buildings and construction sector. We're founded at COP21. with the express agenda of raising the profile of buildings in the climate debate, because it did much more, but it still does fly under the radar, and we really need to change that. Next slide, please. Our objectives are to be a global advocate and a catalyst for solutions, but also a trusted, neutral platform for setting targets and for tracking progress, and setting priorities and measures based on their situation, for which we also work with our regional roadmaps. And this regional roadmap is now being cascaded to the national level, among others in Vietnam, which is really fantastic. And we're really looking forward to hear from Vietnam later. Next slide, please. Key activities for setting targets and supporting countries include the regional roadmaps. I said that already. We also work in Cambodia, for instance, and there's a range of other projects going on by partner organizations all over the world. Tracking progress, we have the Global Status Report for Buildings and Construction, an annual report, and I will speak on that a little bit more, for being a catalyst to really offer the matchmaking, to offer, okay, on the one hand, we have countries or other stakeholders that are looking for solutions, and on the other hand, we actually have institutions that offer that solutions, bring those together. We'd love to speak more with the NDC Partnership about this, given Thibaut's really insightful presentation there, and be a global advocate. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. It seems to move a little bit slow. Thank you. On the setting targets, these are the 8 categories that we have in our regional roadmaps and that are also now being considered in Vietnam. These 8 categories in our minds are really essential to transform the sector across its entire life cycle, because that's our vision. And we have here the target year of 2050. And these include urban planning, new buildings, existing buildings, building operations. Next slide, please. Appliances, materials, resilience, and clean energy. The idea here is that this is a menu of options for countries, for regions, for cities to choose from. We completely recognize that some countries, new buildings, for instance, are more important than existing buildings, and that is, of course, completely fine. So this is a flexible tool that nevertheless goes into great detail to work with countries and help them. Next slide, please. On tracking progress, next slide. Let's talk a bit more about the figures here. So we heard it in the very beginning, and I thank the speaker for raising those numbers, because yes, we have confirmed it just now in December in our recent global status report for buildings and construction. CO2 emissions from the sector are at the highest ever recorded. You see they are at 38%. And if we look at final energy demand, that is at 35%. And it just really strikes me the difference on the one hand between the emissions, I mean, over a third of emissions attributable to the sector on the one hand, and the NDCs, the demands and the support that we see on the other hand. There's such a gap, there's such an opportunity, and we need to seize it. Next slide, please. Let's look at finance. I heard earlier, like a lot of the requests, everything comes down to finance. And of course, this is something that we hear as well. And up to now, yes, if energy efficiency finance funding is increasing, that's the good news. The bad news is the fraction is tiny. I mean, if you look at 5.8 trillion is the overall spending approximately, it's really a sector that stores wealth, and 152 billion into energy efficiency. And we're just talking energy efficiency here. We're not even talking about other aspects. So we can really do something here. Next slide. Now, this to me is important because it speaks to our current situation, COVID-19. We really need to take this opportunity of building back better. And what we know is that investments into building efficiency retrofits yield a much higher sort of jobs return on investment, if you will. This is good news. This means it needs to be included in recovery packages because it's good news for the economy and it's good news for the environment. So estimates point to between 9 and 30 jobs in manufacturing and construction created for every $1 million invested. Next slide. And on NDCs, yes, we heard it before, so I will not be going into depth, but the good news, yes, most countries mention buildings. The bad news, it's not concrete, it's not net zero compliant, there are no concrete measures. I mean, some do, some have them, yes, but a lot of them don't. And that there are certain areas that really need to be covered more. That includes cooling, for instance. also in resilience. Again, very interesting what Thibaut said earlier about that. Next slide. This is a new tracker that we released. We call it the Buildings Climate Tracker. And it's a composite index that shows how the sector is developing year by year, composed of 7 indices: CO2 emissions, NDCs, certification, efficiency investment, codes, renewable energy, and energy intensity. We think this has really great potential to, in one snapshot, show how the sector is developing. And what we see, and I don't think we have that on the slide, but is that progress in the sector is slowing down. We're not doing enough. Yes, there is still progress. So overall, we're still moving, but this movement is slowing down. And that's really not good news, given that the opportunity and the magnitude here. Next slide, please. And this is the final message I would like to leave you with, that really this is an opportunity. COVID recovery packages, I mean, it's just the economic opportunity is just massive here. And we need national governments to step up commitments and NDCs. We need longer term climate strategies. And we need support for key regulation. Again, Global ABC is ready, we're here. There was a talk about a collaborative platform. We're working on this. So we'd love to be a coordination and collaboration hub for NDCs and buildings, and work closely. We already work closely with PEEB, you know, NDC Partnership well, and we look forward to do more. Thank you so much. I think that was the final slide. Yes, thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Nora. That was an excellent presentation. And I think by now, I think the message is pretty clear. We need more action on buildings, and we also need to see that reflected in the NDCs. The big question is now how. And I think this is what many of you come here for, maybe struggling with that question of, well, what are actually effective NDCs for the building sector and how can we implement them? And we have now 2 experts with us, 2 experts in building and NDCs, Peter Graham and Andreas Gruner. So really quickly, Peter is Executive Director of GBPN. He's working on international advocacy, research, education, and sustainable building, design, construction, evaluation, and policy. And he's very active in climate discussions as well. Andreas, he's actually my colleague, so I know him well. He's an advisor with the Program for Energy Efficiency in Buildings. He led building sector projects also across the globe in Ukraine, China, Mexico, and he supports governance with new approaches, both on the technical side as well as financing. And yeah, I think what's important for this work is he's leading PEEB's work for the technical support for Vietnam on the NDC roadmap and NDC implementation, but also on a green housing program that we will hear more about later. Peter and Graham, we're very much looking forward to hearing from you. What are effective NDCs for building sector and how can we implement them? Over to you.
Thanks, Anna. Next slide. Great, thank you. Yeah, so as Anna said, I'm the Executive Director of the Global Buildings Performance Network, and we are an international NGO. We've been working since 2012 to support policy reform to decarbonise in the building sector. And we have a global network of experts that combine global insights with local action, and we help governments educate, implement, and reform building policies and performance. And we've been working in collaboration with the UNEP, Global Alliance on Buildings and Construction, for some years now to help track the development of building sector actions for NDCs, and then follow that through into implementation programs. At the moment, we're particularly focused in Indonesia and India, where we're helping support the development and adoption of energy efficiency regulations for housing. Next slide, please. So part of the culmination of the work looking at NDC commitments for building sector was the development of a guide with the Global ABC on effective building sector actions that could be fundable. And this guide has been out since 2019. And I'm going to take you through some of the key elements of it, because this really does explain how countries are developing effective NDC commitments for the building sector, And then I'm going to hand over to Andreas, who's going to take us through the next stage of this work, which is really developing the toolkit, the tools and resources that enable you to implement the guide's recommendations. Next slide, please. So the guide takes you through 3 key stages in developing building sector actions. The first critical stage is mapping, so to determine the scope of actions the building sector can take that are going to have the biggest impact on mitigation and adaptation. The second is to prioritize those mitigation actions and also pay attention to what the funding criteria are for being able to actually support those actions to be taken. And then the third element is being able to design implementation and monitoring programs that can see progress and help you adapt along the way. Next slide. So that helps us understand what makes a good NDC commitment for the building sector. So based on the research that we've been doing and looking at our interactions with programs in Vietnam and Cambodia, as well as Indonesia and India and other places, what we see is that these 4 things are really important in setting up a good commitment for the building sector in an NDC. The first is to set ambitious sector-specific targets. The second is to be really confident and clear with commitment to regulatory reform in the building sector. The third element is being able to align the building sector actions with adaptation priorities and also non-climate drivers. And the fourth key element, of course, is to have a fundable implementation plan. So let me explain that in a little bit more detail. Next slide, please. So really the first step is being able to set ambitious sector-specific targets. How do we do that? Well, the first stage we need to go through is a mapping stage where we look at what are the existing policies and capabilities in a country. That includes the national level, but also at subnational level as well. We need to understand how the building stock is using energy and what the emissions related to that energy use is. So we have to be able to do a stock model and understand what the mitigation, so the emission baselines are and where the mitigation opportunities lie. And then we need to be able to localize that information. The building sector is incredibly diverse, and we need to understand how those sorts of opportunities map into local markets, and wherever possible, create local market action plans. Okay, next slide. We also then, with that basic information about how the building sector is using energy, what kind of building types are contributing most to emissions growth, we can start to prioritize. So we look at where are the actions that can have a high mitigation and or adaptation impact. We look at what kind of actions are transformative and scalable. So that means actions which are going to lead to transformation of the whole sector. So that's where actions like building codes and standards come in, because they capture a large proportion of the disaggregated emission potential of the sector. We need to demonstrate high levels of stakeholder engagement, because if you don't involve the diverse group of actors in the building sector, then it's very difficult to get the buy-in to implement down the track. And of course, we need to set up the measuring, the reporting and verifiable outcomes. Next slide. So when it comes to ambition, as been said before by Nora and Thibaut and others, that the current set of commitments in the NDCs for buildings is insufficient to meet the Paris goals. So when we're looking at improving or either developing new NDCs for the building sector or reviewing and updating NDCs, we need to be increasing the ambition of performance requirements for buildings, the scope of buildings that are included in NDC action, so that's residential, non-residential and renovation, and also looking at integration with adaptation. We need also to be looking at opportunities for reducing emissions right across the life cycle, not just in the operating phase, and looking for alignment with non-state actor and subnational commitments as well. Very often, commitments made at the subnational level are more ambitious than the national commitments. So lining up with those different commitments to support the national goals is really important. And ambition is really a key for attracting funding as well. Next slide. The second point is about confidence and commitment to regulatory reform. There's quite a lot of research now which enables us to understand what the most cost-effective policy reform pathways are. And we developed a report with Global ABC, which was released last year, which is presenting the evidence base for this. But essentially looking at actions that combine ambitious building codes, rating and disclosure policy, appliance standards, energy efficiency obligations with clear targets for performance and renovation are really key. And that really unleashes a whole range of co-benefits, as Nora mentioned, but particularly around jobs, health, GDP, and household income support. Next slide. Another key component here is about alignment with adaptation goals and also non-climate drivers. We've studied what the building sector actions are that are included in national adaptation plans as well as in NDCs, and we can see a lot of opportunities for incorporating energy savings and mitigation actions within these different actions. And particularly now we're working on economic recovery after COVID. There's a real opportunity to look not just at how buildings can reduce greenhouse gas emissions, but really how low carbon buildings can help build a sustainable economic recovery and help address climate vulnerability and the pressures of urbanization. Next slide. So finally, we need to be able to fund an implementation plan. And this is really important. It takes a good design of governance, being able to access finance, being able to build capability and find technical assistance, particularly technical assistance which is geared towards local level requirements. So next slide, please. So we've been also studying how countries are designing for implementation of building sector actions in NDCs and across other commitment types. And there are a range of best practices which are in place, but essentially there needs to be a plan, and the plan needs to include a political commitment, common goals, it needs to have the ambitious goals, and also it has to have this implementation pathway through to the legal framework. Okay, next slide. So that's the guide, but the question then is, taking the guide and implementing it requires tools. So to tell us about the toolkit, I'd like to hand over to Andreas.
Yeah, many thanks, Peter. Yeah. Dear colleagues and friends from the NDC Partnership, Global ABC, and participants and speakers of this webinar, and a special warm greeting to Mr. Holden. It's very nice having you here in this webinar. I would like to go on building on Peter's input, Peter's presentation. The next step which I would like to share with you briefly is talking about an NDC Buildings Toolkit. What is this about? It's a joint project initiative by the Global ABC, the Global Buildings and Performance Network, and the Program for Energy Efficiency in Buildings. And building on the NDC guide, which Peter just presented, we are currently setting up a toolkit, practical toolkit, which you could say translates the comprehensive NDC guide into a practical hands-on toolkit with instruments and tools to make it easier, let's say, structuring and doing the work in the countries to get the NDCs sharper and more focused for the building sector. It will be a web-based tool, so it's being developed at the moment. And the idea is not having a final product ready, but a growing toolkit where all of you can contribute and make it grow, bring in your experience, and have it a living instrument which grows with experience in different countries. The next slide, please. Yeah, could we? Yeah, thanks. What's PEEB's role in this? Actually, most of you know, some may not know it. The Program for Energy Efficiency in Buildings is supporting different countries in different regions on NDC implementation in the building sector, and its advice on policies, channeling financing through our French partner, the French Agency for Development, to really have large action initiated in the countries. And of course, there's valuable experience which our country partners are gaining in this process. And our role is bringing in this experience, supporting our countries to bring this into the practical toolkit. The next slide, please. The toolkit, the benefits, what we see in this is making it easier for the governments in the different countries, for the practitioners, the experts who are working in the field to shape actions, concrete actions. Also, it's very relevant to create fundable work packages because governments know it, but they can prepare by themselves much clearer specific action packages, and then also ask for international climate finance and get regional finance channeled to support their actions. And of course, it's about linking also the global process of the global ABC with different countries and actors, and bringing in this country experience to have both ends brought together. The countries, of course, are invited to join, to participate in making this toolkit happen. We are working on this, Peter, me, the Global ABC, and you're all invited to join to contribute your experience. It also comes at the right time, this toolkit, Building Back Better. It has been mentioned before by our speakers. It's a good time in all this pandemic situation, seeing how to help economies in different countries on very hands-on practical ways. Next slide, please. Just a very brief look at the 3 steps. Peter already spoke a little bit about it, so we keep this very short. The toolkit will help, very practical, to really look in the countries. Where do we stand? Very often in German we say you don't see the forest because of the trees. There are so many challenges at the same time that you need to look a little bit where the sector stands, what is the growth projection of the building sector, which building types actually have the strongest construction over the next years, and where to take action. Barriers, sound barrier analysis is necessary. Next slide, please. The second step, the prioritizing. Also in this toolkit, we put up together knowledge on how to prioritize building sector actions, which are actually the most cost-benefit actions. Of course, also climate funders who support actions want to know what's the leverage of the climate finance, what comes out in the end. So actions need to be prioritized to form a solid base for funding and for also channeling national funds. The next slide, please. Then after prioritizing, the third step towards meaningful NDCs building sector actions is getting the implementation organized. Where to start implementation. It's essential, and there are countries who set up responsibilities like a coordinating agency who leads the process, but also assign subsector responsibilities in this third step. This is going to be defined. Next step, slide, please. The toolkit, please, one more click. Thank you, or several clicks. The toolkit will provide 3 forms of support: practical advice, effective policies, building codes, how is enforcement working well in different countries. It provides on tools, hand-on tools. The Global ABC building roadmaps provide a useful way forward which countries can build on to develop their own NDC roadmaps in the countries. UNFCCC is working, supported by PEEB and BPIE as well, on a large compendium on greenhouse gas baselines and monitoring. This will be ready soon. And yeah, there are lots of financial instruments to leverage private commercial funding as well, which are practical. And country examples on hands-on implementation experience will be brought into this toolkit. The interesting point is each country is standing at a different stage. So the toolkit is not like from A to Z, you have to do everything. The country can decide and look by itself where to jump into the process and take action. Yeah, the next slide, please. The last one, and to invite all of you, you are very kindly invited to collaborate, to contribute your insights, your experiences. Global ABC later on, I'm sure, will communicate to all of you and to the community how to join, the details. there's the idea to set up a collaborative platform workspace at the platform of Global ABC. For Global ABC members, of course, there's access, and maybe it's also a carrot and invitation to join the Global ABC for countries who are not members yet to see how to contribute. Thank you very much for your attention.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Peter and Andreas. I think that was very comprehensive. And I think I particularly liked, if I understand you correctly, that this is really, you're looking for participation, correct? I think you really want to see kind of requests by people working on these issues. You really want to see best practices that people could share. And yeah, I think really a warm invitation for people to get in touch. But actually, just as a reminder to everyone, I think you might have some of these questions already now, either for the panel discussion, but I think even if you have questions to one of the speakers, I mean, do post them in the Q&A. And then we're monitoring this and we will kind of record all of your questions on the one hand for the discussion, but also if there's anything directed to a panelist directly, we will pass it on as well. And that brings me to the last presentation. And I think everyone was already, I think all the speakers anticipated this presentation. So I'm very honored to welcome Mr. Ha Quang Hung from the Vietnam Ministry of Construction. He is the Deputy Director General of the Housing and Real Estate Management Bureau in the ministry. He brings a broad experience both in the public, private, and academic sector. And he led the team that formulated the Green Growth Action Plan of the ministry. And he also coordinated Vietnam's social housing program between 2013 and 16. And building on this experience, Mr. Hung is currently leading the development of the Vietnam Green Housing Program that he will tell us more about. And the Ministry of Construction also takes the lead to formulate Vietnam's first NDC implementation in the housing sector. So really the topic that we are, that I think everyone on this in the session is very interested in. And also, I think very important to note, because I think that's going to be very interesting to all our colleagues from the climate sector, this work is really implemented in close cooperation and close coordination with the Ministry of the Environment. So I think because that's something many countries are also, well, I think it's an issue in all countries, how to get all the ministries that are important for this work together. So yeah, I think a lot of anticipation. Mr. Hung, the floor is yours. So I think we cannot hear you yet. I'm just checking with my colleagues whether the sound is working. I think you are still on mute. We can see from here. Yeah, no, I think the tool still shows it for mute, and that's probably, yeah, I think that looks good. Check. I think if you could try speaking. Yeah.
Hello, testing.
That sounds wonderful.
Okay, can you hear now?
Yeah.
Okay, that's good.
Very good. Perfect.
So first of all, thank you, Anna and Mr. Paula for inviting me to take part in this webinar today. In order to learn and also to share our lessons learned, experiences of Vietnam. We have this presentation. So in this webinar, I'd like to talk about two things. First, GHG emission mitigation in the building sector and our proposal to develop the Vietnam Green Building Program. First of all, in terms of the overall picture of the building and construction sector of Vietnam at the moment, the use of energy in the building sector and operation of buildings. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Yes, that's it. So at the moment, the use of energy for building construction and operation account for 43% of total annual electricity consumption in Vietnam, contributing about 30% of energy-related CO2 emission in Vietnam. 95% of commercial and high-rise buildings are not yet taken into consideration of energy efficiency measures. In terms of the growth figures in Vietnam for population growth, it is predicted to grow from 95.8 million with population. For urbanization rate, it is predicted to increase to around 59% by 2049. At the moment, the GDP growth rate of Vietnam is from 6 to 7% over the past 20 years. For the per capita living space, around 24 square meter per person. Next slide, please. In terms of the relevance of the building sector for implementing the NDC targets, at the moment, Vietnam has submitted our updated NDC in September 2020. Accordingly, energy saving is crucial for reaching the unconditional targets. Implementing the Paris Agreement in the building and construction sector, at the moment, the Prime Minister of Vietnam issued Decision 2053, approving the plan for implementation of Paris Agreement. For the Ministry of Construction, the MOC also issued the action plan to implement the Paris Agreement in the period of 2020-2030 in Decision 967 of 2020. Next slide. For the development of the NDC buildings roadmap, at the moment, Vietnam have implemented some activities. First, identify the roadmap methodology. In collaboration with PEEB, we organize the roundtable and consultation with experts in Vietnam and the technical stakeholder consultation with Global ABC. In 2021, we will complete our NDC roadmap in the building sector as the basis for policy improvement and adoption. Next slide. For the approach of NDC buildings roadmap, for the construction sector, the objective and structure of NDC Vietnam is to identify common goals, targets, and timeline for implementation of key actions of GHG emission in the 8 subsectors of the construction sector. You can see on the right-hand side, these 8 subsectors: urban planning, new buildings, building retrofits, building operations, building systems, materials, resilience to climate change, and clean energy in the building. Next slide. In terms of the key challenges in Vietnam in the implementation of NDC, first of all, in terms of the legal and institutional framework, Vietnam have the Building Energy Efficiency Code, but they are insufficient in terms of ambition, scope, and enforcement. The policy-making process cannot keep pace with Vietnam's rapid urbanization rate. In terms of technology, we still lack building energy data, insufficient local markets. In terms of finance, we lack financial incentives to promote EE buildings. In terms of the need and awareness, next slide, it is still scattered and there is low awareness of the opportunities. And for the need of the municipalities and households is still at moderate level. Due to the limitation of time, I'd like to move on to slide number 12 to talk about the proposal for developing the green buildings in Vietnam. Next slide, please. So first of all, I would like to talk about the mandate and functions of my department. Our department was established in 1993 as a unit under MOC of Vietnam. The function, the mandate include two things, studying to produce policy and state management function. In the four key areas, including residential housing, government administrative buildings, public residential buildings, and governing a real estate market. In terms of the housing sector, we are in charge of both commercial housing, we are in charge of social housing and low cost commercial housing. Implementing the National Housing Development Strategy and some social housing programs. Next slide, please. For the policy framework in the housing development. The previous one, sorry. Yes. This is a policy framework for energy efficiency in the housing sector. At the moment, we have the different legal framework. We have the National Housing Development Strategy of Vietnam. We have the National Technical Regulation on Energy Efficient Buildings and high-rise apartment buildings. Next slide. For the adjustment of policy in comparison with 2011, in the strategy of 2011, we just mentioned energy efficient housing in the orientation without specific targets. And we expect in the period of 2021 onwards, we will add the objective in accordance with the new context. We encourage the EE building in the housing programs like low-cost commercial housing. Next slide, please. This is a need for high-rise apartment buildings. On average, the annual increase of a high-rise apartment building is 2.3 million square meters of apartments, in which the low-cost commercial housing account for 2/3 of the market. Next slide. For the low-cost commercial housing, and every year we have the need of 33 million square meters. And at the moment, the need for low-cost commercial housing is 6 times higher than the actual supply. And as we have estimated, when we apply all of the design solutions, material and operation solutions, we can save around 30 to 40% of the energy consumed. So it is estimated that within 10 years, the saving will be around 6.3 billion kilowatt hour. Next slide. In terms of the recommendations and proposal for the coming time, there are 4 main recommendations. First, dissemination and communication of benefits. And secondly, stimulate demand for housing market through projects and schemes. And thirdly, develop incentive mechanism to encourage investors and apartment owners. And promulgation of EE housing development strategies. Next slide. Can you move on to page 21? This is the specific recommendations. Our objective for the green housing program is to transform the buildings into low emission building for the middle income segment. The target are the households in urban area with middle income level, focusing on young families. Next slide, please. Oh, yes. No, previous one. Thank you. For developing policy and mechanism, we have the following tasks of the 3 different units. For the supply side, we need to develop financial incentive to housing developers. For the demand side, we need to have a financial incentive for apartment owners and raise their awareness on the benefits of green housing. For state management agencies, they need to set up the certification system for energy efficiency to create database and systematic extension, and also to other housing segments. And conduct independent verification and greening of apartment code and compliance. So that's all of my presentation on the required topic. So we very much hope to listen to your comment, your idea, especially when it comes to our recommendation on green housing program of Vietnam. We are now collaborating with PEEB and GIZ to study this proposal. Thank you very much for your attention.
Excellent. Thank you very much for this great presentation. I think this really showed not only the theory, but how this looks in practice. Yeah, I think we're done with our presentation. I think we had the full picture, stretching from kind of like the importance to really kind of how could you do it in concrete country experience. And we still have a little bit of time. I think we have about 10 minutes left to answer a few questions. Given that we only have 10 minutes, which I also need for wrapping up that rich discussion, I would ask any answers to be really, really brief and concise, but I think we also want to not miss out on these questions. And again, really a warm welcome and a warm invitation to write questions in the chat that you might also want to address to presenters individually. So I have one question. I think we should answer this for everyone. When will the toolkit be available? I think, Andreas, you already answered it in the chat, but maybe just a really quick response about when people might expect the toolkit, and if there's maybe also possibilities to engage in the meantime.
Yes, sure. We are working on the toolkit, and I would say that probably by around June we will be in the position to upload it, to provide the space, but also we have to see with Global ABC on that. No, I would count roughly by June putting the tool online to be able to work on it.
That seems like a good estimate. Yeah.
Yeah.
Great, and I have another question. Maybe we'll do, there's some practical ones, but there's one that's also quite ambitious. So I'll read it out to you. On the NDC toolkit, on the mapping, are there any efforts to collect building energy consumption data onto a common digital platform on real-time basis? Then we will know where we stand, updated every minute, 24/7, and I think globally. So it is a very interesting proposal, and I think I'll maybe give that question to Nora, if you have any good ideas about this.
This is a great question, and this is definitely needed. Thank you for asking that question. We want to be able to provide this, but we need you all. We need the countries, we need the organizations, and so on. We need the data essentially. But we're working on a collaborative space, and the idea is really to have this sort of ongoing data effort that everybody can feed into, and that once a year it's published in the global status report. But it could be accessible for our members at any moment. By the way, the collaborative platform will be accessible to all our members. So if you're interested in it and you're not yet a member, please consider joining us.
Great, yeah. And I think I also have a question to Vietnam. And I think it's the question about the use of such an NDC building roadmap. How does the NDC building roadmap help Vietnam to move towards green construction and especially green housing? Yeah, I would like to give that question to Mr. Hung.
So in my opinion, in Vietnam, after the studying and promulgating our regulation, it can help to harmonize the responsibilities and the benefits of the stakeholders in the construction and building sector. And we can also revise and improve the roadmap in accordance with the instructions and orientations of the government. At the same time, when the NDC building roadmap is issued, it is also the basis to attract the green climate finance for the national green housing program. And we are now collaborating with PEEB to look for the financing sources, and we very much look forward to AFD support. That's my answer. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much. So I think we slowly have to wrap up. I think there's a few questions that might also be answered bilaterally, but I think I have one that might also really be relevant for other countries, and I think it's a question to the NDC Partnership. So a question from Kenya: for countries that were not in the list of countries that need further support, how can they be considered? Green buildings have now been included in the Kenya Enhanced NDC issued in December 2020. So either Thibaut or Ploy, I think that is for you.
Should I go? Or?
We can both answer. Thibaut, you can go first. Let's see.
This is good teamwork.
Yeah, to reach out to us. I mean, I think the presentations will be made available, and you can find our contact information at the end of our presentation. So we will be glad to put you in touch with our colleagues working with Kenya. And thank you for your interest.
Yes, in terms of addressing requests or additional requests from countries, generally we engage via our country engagement processes. And as Thibaut mentioned, we can forward this information to colleagues who are responsible for the region and Kenya specifically. Thank you.
Okay, with a view to the time, 12:26, I think I see more questions coming. I think we'll note them all to be able to connect participants. And yeah, I think I have the difficult task of wrapping up a rich discussion. I think there were a few points that came out really clearly. I mean, I think, preaching to the converted partly, but there's clearly a big need to address the rising emissions from the building sector and also the adaptation potential that we have in the sector. So what we see, there's a huge potential, but so far, well, the ambition in the NDCs and also kind of like in terms of the scope of what is being covered, we're not there yet. So I think that's a clear kind of, I think a clear direction that we see for work going forward. What we also saw is for the NDC targets, I think both is important. On the one hand, clear NDC targets, but then also this question of implementation. I think we really saw that from the presentation from Vietnam that, yeah, I think just the target is just not enough, but I think you really need that drive, and you really need a good, well, I would even say a coalition of ministries and institutions that drive this process. Then I think, yeah, when we talk about implementation, I think that issue of finance came up. I think as a program that is really, I mean, dear to our heart, I think it's really important to think about kind of the capacities and kind of the policy framework, and financing can really kind of give that extra boost. No, I think it's, I mean, now I'm sitting in Germany. Germany has a big program on green buildings. I think worldwide we see similar efforts, and I think this is really something that I heard from many of you today. And I think also that point of support to countries, there's, I think, a lot of ideas of what could be done. I think maybe that discussion has also given you a few new ideas and a few, well, a few new ideas what could be done. I think we heard from the colleagues in the NDC Partnership how they can broker kind of support. And yeah, I think that is a very, good basis to start from. Definitely, this session has been a call to action. We all roll up our sleeves, and I think we'll get going. So with that, I would just like to thank, and I have a list of people to thank today. So first of all, a big thank you to all the panelists. Really rich, really interesting discussions. I think we can also see that from the questions. Also a big thank you to the audience, to the people listening here, to the people asking questions. I think what we've heard is there's really a lot of scope to engage, and I think we heard it from the presentations on the toolkit. We heard it about kind of mobilizing people through the NDC Partnership. Global ABC is really kind of, I mean, mobilization is what they do. Do engage, connect with the speakers, connect with these platforms, and really, I think, yeah, kind of the voices from the implementation, that's really what we need. And last but not least, I would like to thank the colleagues sitting in the US from the NDC Partnership. I think they started at 4:30 this morning. So yeah, thank you very much for making this such a smooth discussion. And yeah, I hope you'll get a little bit of rest. So with that, I would like to thank you and wish you like a productive day or a restful evening. And I think we'll all stay in touch to continue this discussion about effective NDCs for the building sector. Thank you.
Thank you and have a good day.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.